Let me be very clear. I've said this many times. I love men. I love men. I've raised 2 of them. I like boys of all, like when I say boys, to me, I think, I think of all men are boys, but like I like boys. As Peter, I like them. I like them. I have no problem with men.
Jen's
what we're talking about is devaluing and oppressing women.
Yes.
That's what we're talking about.
Right. We can value women and value men. I agree with you. I love my husband. I love my brothers.
I love boys. Love them.
And
I love my stepson. I love my dad.
Yes.
I want to be very clear about something, and I want my boys here to listen. The overwhelming, and I mean the overwhelming majority of women out there that hate men, that say nasty shit about men all the time, let me assure you, probably every one of them has been sexually violated in a very bad way in some capacity.
Well, we all have.
You go through those types of traumatic experiences, and not only do you go through them, but you seek help, and they tell you to go kick rocks. How do you think they're going to feel? Let me tell you something. If you have not been inappropriately touched, how about forcibly inappropriately touched? You don't want to know what that's like, guys. You don't.
I don't know. We've talked about this. I don't know an adult woman that has not been violated. Right. I do not know an adult woman. And so we've all been violated. That's just the way it is. Yeah. Now, so for people who don't like that, then say something about it. Control your own kind, people. And it's like, this is a man thing.
And there's also something to be said for the society that we've created through social media, through unrealistic expectations. It is so much harder to be a woman, especially when it comes to your looks and the things that you want to do to either be attractive, feel attractive. And again, there is this lashing out at the world that so many people want to do, because this world is very depressing. It is very sad, and interpersonal relationships are essentially dead. Jen and I now see each other from a very far distance, but in some ways, because of technology, that's the good part of it. But there's also the negative part of it, which keeps people like completely indoors. There really is something to be said for how we've ended up where we've ended up. So, again, like you were saying about pop culture, I call it celebrity obsessed culture. We have a very big problem in this country who we look up to, who are really, doing things. And you did mention Madonna. Madonna, aside from the fact that she is not who she was 40 years ago, who is?
None of us are.
Madonna, you could say what you want about her. She was quite the talent in the mid-'80s. She really had something going, as did a lot of other women. And the one thing that I've noticed over the years, and this is my final thought in terms of the conversation this evening, and I've mentioned this to Jen many times before. I think one of the things that has happened from a man's perspective that has made things as bad as they are today, in terms of what women have to go through, I think pornography took a very significant turn, probably in the mid 90s, I would say, is really when it started. It was a conglomeration of a lot of different things. But you go back and you see the way porn was done in the 70s and 80s in particular, and there was abuse going on, there's no question. But in terms of how the women were generally treated, there was a level of respect that women had then that got deteriorated to the point today in which women are just considered disgusting, slutty whores, and they should be treated like crap. That includes the way that they talk, the way that they are treated in terms of scenes, things of that nature. And again, I think that in so many ways—
Well, at least we've progressed from getting burned. I mean, sure. So now we don't get burned. I mean, we don't get burned at the stake. Right. We've progressed to being slut shamed.
Well, yeah, but then you take it into where we are today with things like OnlyFans and the objectification that has just become completely insane. And of course, the people who run these organizations are the most depraved humans alive. So that I think that has a lot to do with this. I do. I think that's
I would push back a little bit on the idea that porn might have been more respectful or less harmful in the 1970s. I think we would need to add in a couple other things to that. Our technology was different, right? Our media outlets were different. When we look at the development of the pornography, well, first of all, I mean, pornography has been around since as long as we've figured out our body parts, right? But when we look at what we might consider modern or contemporary pornography, what we're also looking at is the way technology changes, right? The reason why we had such easy access to VHS tapes to watch anything, right? To watch movies, to go to the local video store on a Friday and pick up VHS. The reason why we did that is because VHS was cheaper to make. And the reason why VHS was more plentiful was because the porn industry chose VHS over Betamax. Betamax is a higher quality tape,
Yeah.
but it was more expensive. And the porn industry went VHS, and the rest of us watched our G-rated and PG-rated movies on VHS, largely because of the porn industry. When we all started getting cable television and getting pay channels like HBO or Cinemax or so on and so forth, our cable bill, and when cable was like on top, right? When cable was the thing, like part of the reason why our cable bill was it was sure felt expensive, but was as inexpensive as it was, it could have been much more expensive, was a lot of those corporations that had private channels, they funded them through pornography, right? I mean, it might have been late night on HBO or Cinemax, might have been like the soft core porn,
Right.
but the
Right.
hardcore porn paid for all of that. It brought
Right.
millions of dollars into it. When we started moving out of VHS into laser discs and DVDs were cheaper to produce and cheaper to shoot on, and the porn industry did that. And when when you and I first got the internet, it was largely text-based. The porn
Right.
industry absolutely helped fund an increasing visual technology, and now we don't need to leave our houses for pornography. So we've got a lot of that behind the scenes, not just the representation, which is of course hugely important, especially in pornography, because we're looking at how it has been deemed acceptable in a certain industry and on a certain level to treat women's bodies. The vast majority of mainstream porn, I'm not going to get into the fringes of it all, I know
Right.
less
Right.
about that, but the vast majority of mainstream pornography is, as much as any of this is written, produced, and directed by men. It is for male pleasure. Women's pleasure in the sexual acts is superfluous at best, right? Any type of woman involved in any sex acts in pornography is there for male pleasure, even if it's, girl on girl. It's to entice
Correct.
men, not to entice other women. This has shifted, obviously, as our technologies have become slightly more democratized. We do have an increase in feminist or LGBTQ erotica, but that's not the mainstream. That's not corporately
Right.
owned. You have to work harder to find it. It probably comes behind a paywall. If we want to do an intersection for education, the biggest sex educator in our country is pornography, because it's super scary to ask questions about what your body is doing. You don't really want to ask your parents. You might not want to ask your teachers, but porn is there for you for free. And then when we get to something like OnlyFans, I think one thing to think of with OnlyFans is that absolutely the powers behind are profiting mightily
Yes.
off of this, but the folks working as cam girls or within OnlyFans, to some extent, may get to determine what it is they're doing and when they're doing it. There is this idea, and it might be just a tiny bit of an idea, that this is a slightly more democratized approach to pornography, that if sex is going to sell, then the individual can choose what they want to sell. But again, when we take it out to a much wider lens, no pun intended, I should have used a different metaphor, I apologize, is we're looking at a largely male-dominated industry through the male gaze for male pleasure. It doesn't mean that there isn't room for other types of sexual content or more fair erotica. It's that that's not what is in the corporate control, that's not the dominant narrative, and that's not what's free.
So, in other words, and I've never had OnlyFans, but I don't have a lot of apps on my phone. So, I've never had OnlyFans. I know what it is. So, on the one hand, how nice that women are able to take control of their own selves and have their own channel, right? But then, if I'm getting this right, OnlyFans is basically the digital pimp.
Sure.
Okay, so it's the same. It's the same premise. It's the
So
same premise. It's just been digitized instead of it being an actual person. So she's not being physically beaten.
right.
but she's
But
being
is she her own?
profited off.
Is she her own producer? Is she profiting? Is she being her own producer? I think of, like, a person that I wrote a lot about in the book, Kathleen Hanna. She was the lead singer of multiple feminist punk bands, Bikini Kill, La Tigra, and she worked for a while as a stripper, and she was told, you can't be a feminist and be a stripper. That's like that. Those are contraindicated, as it were, right? They cancel each other out. And her argument was, I can pay my bills, right? I can pay my bills. I can keep the lights on. I can keep the rent paid. I can put food on the table. I can be a punk rock artist. Like, we've boxed women into very particular compartments, and then we've attached the same rules for feminism, right? Feminism is not stripping, but stripping might be paying the bills, which can therefore be kind of feminist, right? Like, so I think we also have to consider how we expand our categories, and how when we expand them, that we don't just celebrate them and just be like, oh, okay, great, anything goes. Not at all. But that we have to look really carefully at those forces of production, really carefully at what somebody might be doing, what kind of autonomy or independence might they have, what are these choices that are being made, and what is our sphere of choice making? Because sometimes you're choosing between two really bad options, and one might
Right.
be just less bad, right? But what do we do when we think about food and shelter and warmth and moving forward?
Well, we don't protect
said.
women in this country.
We do
I
not
mean,
protect
mostly
women in this
and
country.
globally. That's globally. We just
Right. We don't
women.
protect women globally. Absolutely.
So if here's what I always think about women that strip, and this as somebody, and I worked at Hooters in college, so I own that. But like, the idea that we're able to make money off of our physicality, it's nice to have control over that, and you have some independence because you control your own thing. But it always makes me sad that we live in this world where that's the option,
Sure.
where that's how it's possible. Because, and also I would suggest that if these women had, food, clothing, shelter, and all of their basic needs met, that there would definitely be less women. There's going to be women that want to show their parts. That's just
Sure.
the thing. And there's always going to, and all the power to them. Look, I've seen women that there's a woman at Pilates that if I looked like her, I'd walk around naked. So I get it. I'm with it. But like, I think that there's a large amount of women that wouldn't necessarily be making that choice amongst the bad options.
Sure. But when the forces of production say this is the only way you can make a living, or this is the best way that you can make a living so that you can also pursue your art, and that working at Hooters might not be able to actually pay the bills as much as they need to get paid, right? That, these are the forces of patriarchy. This is the intersection of patriarchy and capitalism. And we might be working really hard to change the system, particularly when we're talking about feminist punk rock and feminist punk art, might be working really hard to change the system. And also, we are in the system. So what do? We do not give anybody in our culture, but absolutely not women, the opportunity for greater experiences, for more enriching experiences that also come with the ability to, like, keep the lights on.